Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Your Relationship With podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Snow. I want to say things are going better since the last introduction I recorded for last week's episode. Actually, no, that one was pretty good. It was 2 weeks ago that I couldn't get my shit together. That was the time. Okay, well, now here we are 2 weeks later, still can't get my shit together. Thank you. You're welcome. Goodbye. No, everything is good over here. The Powerful Women Rising community is growing so quickly, and we're having so much fun over there, and all that is really good. And there's always drama with the foster kittens and with my actual cats and all the things. But it's all good. Here we are. We're recording a new podcast. I am interviewing today Adrienne Bishop. She is amazing. She is a life coach. She's a parenting coach, and she specializes in helping overwhelmed and anxious, highly sensitive moms parent their highly sensitive kids with confidence and without losing themselves in parenting or yelling all the time. It's possible, apparently, is what I'm told. I don't know. I don't have human children, so I don't know. But I really, really love this topic of being a highly sensitive person, especially as it relates to business, because I think there are some misconceptions about what that means to be a highly sensitive person, how you know if that is you, and if it is you, what that means about you, and what that means about your ability to be successful in business. If you've been following me for a while, you know I am a big believer that you don't have to look like and sound like and act like every other quote unquote successful female entrepreneur in order to actually be successful. And when you can embrace the parts of yourself that are different, whether it is being neurodivergent in some way or being highly sensitive, being shy, being an introvert, whatever it is, when you can embrace that that is part of who you are and you can just show up in that being, then you're going to attract the people who are right for you. That's been true for me. It's been true for my clients, and I see it being true all over the place. And Adrienne is actually a great example of that. She has a story that she tells often about an Instagram post that went viral, and it really was just her showing up as her true authentic self. And so many people related to that because it was so different than a lot of the fake stuff that people were hearing in the parenting community. So I just love everything that she has to say. Adrienne is a certified integrative life coach. She's a certified positive discipline parent educator, and she loves helping moms unshame and process their feelings so they can feel free, at peace, and confident and love themselves and their children more. So today we are talking about your relationship with being a highly sensitive entrepreneur. So it doesn't matter if you're a mom or not, doesn't matter if you think you're highly sensitive or not. I think this is a great episode for everyone to listen to so that they can either recognize these traits in themselves or they can recognize these traits in their clients. And I think that a lot of the tips that Adrienne shares in this episode are going to be really helpful for you either way. So check out my interview with Adrienne. Make sure to follow her on Instagram. She's also offering a 20-minute free session for any listeners who feel like this applies to them and they want to work on unblocking some issue in their business. She would love to chat with you about that. So here we go. Hello, Adrienne. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so excited to chat with you today. I had a hard time narrowing down the topics that I wanted to chat with you about because you are a wealth of knowledge, some on purpose and some things you've just learned through experience. But I think this is a great topic today. We're talking about your relationship with being a highly sensitive entrepreneur. So before we dig into that, tell everybody a little bit about what it means to be highly sensitive.
Sure. So basically, it's a personality trait. So there's no disorder here. There's no official diagnosis. It's just a matter of you identifying yourself using these traits. And so what it is I'll just use Elaine Aron, who wrote the book and did the research on highly sensitive people. I'll use her acronym, which is DOES. So the first letter is D. And that is for deep thinking or depth of processing. So basically what that means is it's people that have the trait of, a very active imagination, or they think very deeply about things. Sometimes that can be overthinkers, right? So it could be some of those kinds of ideas, or the depth of processing. A lot of kids or people, I work with parents with kids, will process things a little slower side because they're deeply processing it, right? It's not like it's this surface level. So like that includes the five senses. So even walking into a room, they're going to process not only what they're seeing, what they're, hearing, but they'll also process like everyone's feelings, everyone's like sort of energy. And so it takes a while for people like this to either respond sometimes or maybe even like just warm up to everyone, and just kind of get used to what's happening in the room. Sometimes they feel like they're absorbing everything without being able to filter it, which leads me to the next letter, which is an O, overstimulation, overarousal. So this is the same idea. So you come into a room and you're getting all this input from all your senses. And it can be very overstimulating because people that are highly sensitive tend to have trouble filtering and not notice certain things. So they're noticing everything. And then it's just like constant stimulation. And then the overarousal part, which is key, is about the nervous system. So the nervous system is a big deal with highly sensitive people because we have an overactive nervous system. So that's going to tend toward anxiety, tend toward flight or fight response. It's almost like you have, let's just say there was a bucket, that's your nervous system. It's like your bucket's already half filled, right? And so the more that you fill it up, right? Yeah, at all times. So you can fill it up faster, which then overflows faster, which then leads into all these other sort of exterior things like anxiety and emotional dysregulation. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have a harder time regulating your nervous system because it's overactive. And then you have the E, which is empathy. So that one's pretty obvious. That's sort of the same idea that I said about coming into a room and feeling everyone's energy and kind of absorbing everyone's feelings. Also, the empathy can be like, someone's hurt and you are hurt, you feel hurt, like physically, you can actually kind of feel the pain, or you just, struggle to watch movies that are really, really sad or really scary because you're in there, you're like really a part of it. And you're feeling the emotion so intensely. Very empathetic. Empaths is another way they describe people like this. And then they have the S, which is sensory processing sensitivity. So it's not a disorder again. So we're not going to the extreme here. We're just going into the milder version of it, which is where you'll see a lot of all the five senses. Like you get startled very easily. You don't like loud music. You struggle with bright lights, like super fluorescent lights. Sometimes it gives you a headache, or you really just can't be in a room like that all the time. Also, you can be a picky eater, or children can be picky eaters. Textures are really difficult. And then like clothing bothers you, or physical sensations bother you. So tags or seams or jeans or tight clothes or heels, like a lot of people that are sensitive struggle to wear non-comfortable clothes. So that's kind of like a general idea as to like what highly sensitive means based in the research.
Okay, that's fascinating. So how did you come to know all of this? Because usually the first question I ask people is like, tell us about you and your relationship with whatever the topic is. But I wanted to ask that question first so people at least knew what we were talking about before we started talking about it. But you mentioned that you work with parents. So is that how you came across this, or are you highly sensitive, or both?
Yes. So yeah, a little bit of both. So the first thing I found out was that I was highly sensitive because I started working with a therapist who specialized in highly sensitive people. And she brought it up to me after I was having a lot of issues with anxiety, issues with chronic pain, actually. And she said, you might want to look into this and just see if it resonates with you, because if it does, it might be helpful just to understand yourself better. And it like changed my life. I mean, people say that all the time, but it really did, because I felt initially before that something was wrong with me, like totally wrong with me. I felt very alone. I felt like I was the only one in the world that felt this way. And then there was a whole book written about people like me, So I was like, oh, I feel so much like just more normal and more accepted. And the way she wrote the book too, it just helped me understand myself better. And so that was the first thing. And then as I started to parent my kids, I struggled. Like I had a lot of just like dissociation, like it was too much. is really what it was. Just overstimulation was huge. And I know a lot of parents out there feel the same way, but the overstimulation was so bad that like I was almost like paralyzed, like emotionally, like I couldn't do certain things. And it turned into like a really bad, anxious, place. And when I figured out like, okay, I'm highly sensitive, this is probably affecting my parenting, I need to kind of work on this. I started reading a lot about highly sensitive kids, highly sensitive parents, and then I know how to parent them and how to be a parent that has sensitivities. And it really made a huge difference in how I was able to just like, move away from that anxious, highly emotional place so that I could really be present for my kids. And then I realized that they were all three of them were highly sensitive, which was another challenge on itself, like on top of me being highly sensitive, because now we have these people that have highly, high active nervous systems all kind of in the same house. And especially with kids, they don't know what they're doing in regards to managing.
Like hiding in a closet.
Yeah. He's also pretty sensitive, but has learned how to manage it in a very different way. Like highly sensitive men kind of express it differently than women and kids, but in a sense, he kind of got it, right? But he was definitely not as emotional, like outwardly. So yeah, you're right. It was a difficult sort of like combo, but in the end, it was very good. Like everything is, I actually think that highly sensitive parents tend to be really, really in tune parents with their kids, which is a good thing. You just need to learn how to not like get absorbed and sort of lose yourself in that kind of thing. So that was what was happening to me. And I was also, the anxiety was really difficult. So I got all those things under control. And again, years of working on it. Of course, it wasn't like a overnight situation, but knowing that I had the traits of highly sensitive, that really did help me with understanding myself and actually getting the help I needed. So then I was able to find people that knew about that. And I was able to kind of go to the next step if I needed more help. And so it was really good to have that information.
Yeah. And what a gift for you to have for your own children, and also to be able to share with parents that you work with of other children. I mean, I know it's not a diagnosis per se, but it makes me think of like before we realized that ADHD was something other than just like naughty little third grade boys. And before we knew that what autism spectrum was, right? Same thing with this. It's like, why your kids are not just being a pain in the ass to be a pain in the ass. There is a reason. And I would think that when you can help parents understand that and see like, not only is there a reason, though you are the way you are as an adult, there's also the reason that he or she is the way they are as a child. That's got to be very empowering, I would think.
Yes. And it actually changes how you respond to your kids once you understand them, which makes obviously logical sense. But if you're knowing that your kid is not getting defensive because they're just being rude, but they're getting defensive because they feel a crap ton of shame, because that's really common with sensitive kids. And then to speak to that shame is actually how you help them out of it. It's like, it actually gives you the solution once you understand the cause, right? So it's really, really important to not just assume, like, of course, people are going to assume things, but opening yourself up to the idea that there might be something else underneath that can help you actually solve the problem is huge, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how does this relate to entrepreneurs? I know you mentioned that it shows up and it's processed differently in women than men. So today we're talking specifically about women because that's who listens to this podcast, right? But also women entrepreneurs. How has it affected you as an entrepreneur, and how have you seen it affect other women?
Yeah. So I remember sort of starting my business and it being like the scariest thing I've ever done, which I think a lot of people feel that way. You do not have to be highly sensitive to be afraid of starting a business. But I remember it really being, with the way that I would describe it, it was an overload for my nervous system, like putting myself in front of others, my work, how I felt, what I was doing, even just offering to coach people, right? Because I started out with a couple of free clients. It was a very, very visceral experience of overload, and not that it wasn't something that I continued doing. I kept doing it. But what happens is, for me, especially, I think a lot of highly sensitive people, their bodies will not let them overload themselves too many times before they will literally stop you in your tracks. Either it will give you something, it'll make you sick. It will give you physical pain. You'll have some sort of big anxiety attack. You'll shut down, like, emotionally, and have to go, like, I don't know, sleep. Or you just won't get clients is really what happens, right? It's like your nervous system knows you're not in the right place to receive and to help. And so the biggest thing that I have learned is that you need to know how to take care of that piece of the puzzle. You need to know how to pay attention to it. And it can't be this hustly work environment at all, which I think a lot of sensitive people go into entrepreneurship because they can't do the 9 to 5, because they can't do the employee situation, right? It's too much, or it just doesn't work for their personalities. And so they get into entrepreneurship and they have all this leeway and flexibility, and they can take breaks, and then they start hustling or pushing themselves. And then it just completely falls apart because it's not working for them and their systems. And so a lot of times I still am working on this. I have to really pay attention and sort of prevent some of these things from happening by using certain tools and by really making sure that my nervous system is regulated as much as possible. And again, I still miss it because your unconscious mind is really good at sort of tricking you. So that's also fun, is like, I feel okay. Like, I'm okay. I don't need to pay attention to this. But in reality, you're just in like survival mode or shock. So what happened to me this spring actually put me into survival mode, is that I ended up going viral on Instagram, and I was getting so many consults. I got like 46 in 1 month. And then I got like all these clients from it. And I was like, I feel okay. I can do this. I mean, it was incredibly overwhelming, but I didn't like shut down. I didn't have any of the nervous system issues. Well, what happened was a few months later, it caught up to me. Right. So like, it's never something that you're able to sort of get away from. And so I think a lot of people, like, pretty commonly, like if you just in business, you're going to put yourself, you're going to post a lot. You're going to post something that's vulnerable. You're going to post something. And a lot of times there's this like really strong shame feeling that comes up, like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. People are going to hate me. People are going to not like me. And I think most people feel that way to an extent, but I think sensitive people are going to internalize it so much more. If you ever get criticism or a negative comment, or you get somebody emailing you back about something you emailed them, you're internalizing all of it. And it can be really difficult to filter and manage. And so that is an overload when it comes to entrepreneurship. And so it's important to have those tools to help you to, be able to regulate.
Yeah. And it sounds like it can show up in a number of different ways, whether it is like, I think there's probably times that it is so much that it's like paralyzing, and I'm just going to stop, and I'm just not going to post, and I'm going to cancel this consult, and I'm not going to do the things. Or the opposite, like you were talking about, where it's like, I'm just going to push through it, and I'm just going to do more and post more, and I'm going to ignore my feelings, and I'm going to shut this out, and I'm just going to keep like plowing forward. So I think that's important to note, that it's not necessarily like, it's not going to look the same in everybody, right? It's probably going to show up in different ways, depending on a lot of different things, how you've learned to process your feelings, how feelings were handled as a child growing up.
Yep.
All kinds of different things, the environment that you're in now, how badly you feel like you need to make money. All of those things probably play a factor. Definitely.
And that's a really good point. You definitely want to tune into what's happening for you, and it will show up very differently. So the way it shows up for me is just my example, right? But yeah, definitely, like, it can be a little bit deceptive sometimes, and I think even if you're not highly sensitive as an entrepreneur, you're going to go through some of this too. I think where it becomes like a sensitive issue is when it like is just baseline for you, and it's who you are, and it never sort of disappears completely, right? So like there's a fear of posting, or there's like a nervousness around posting, but maybe you do it, get some clients, you're feeling okay, and you're able to keep going, and that's that. Like, that's probably not a sensitive person. But like if it's something that just is like a through line of, no matter how successful you are or how much money you're making, you still have that feeling to like a very extreme, place, I would say it might be a sensitivity.
For sure.
Yeah.
So can we go back to when your video went viral and you got all these consults and all these clients? Because I'm sure there are people listening that are like, gosh, I wish that would happen to me. And I don't feel bad for you, lady. But
Totally.
what were your big takeaways from that experience? Because it sounds like initially you felt like, okay, I got this under control. And then there was a point that you were like, okay, maybe I could have done this a bit differently. What were your big learning experiences from that?
So we all want this fast growth, right? It feels like it is the goal, but I have to be honest, most people cannot sustain it and they can't really manage it, even if you're not sensitive. Okay. I went from 500 followers to 68,000 in less than 2 months. That is a massive shift, right? So you don't have time to catch up. Your nervous system doesn't have time to catch up with that number. And plus I think my reel got 3.8 million views and I was getting over 1,000 comments. So not only was I like getting views, but I was getting negative comments, right? Of course, tons of positive, but then I was getting a lot of negative and my nervous system was just like a mess. Every little comment I was freaked out about, upset about. And what I learned was that number one, you can just block and delete all of those comments and they don't actually matter. And number two, like this is sort of what will happen if you get big. Like if you get exposure, you're going to have to take the negative with the positive and then figure out how to manage the negative in a way that feels sustainable for you. So now I just literally delete or block anyone that's negative. But at first it was like, oh my God, like this is awful. Like I want to go hide in a hole and I don't want this to happen. Right. And so, even though it sounds like a good thing, it was really, really challenging to manage. And then I was not able to set boundaries. Like I realized I didn't have systems in place on top of not being able to set boundaries around how many clients I wanted, what clients I really wanted to say no to was really difficult. I said, and I didn't even have like the systems in place where I only got 2 consults a day or something. I didn't even have a schedule in place so that it backed up how I wanted to live and, be as an entrepreneur. So I was working like 60 hours because I felt like I couldn't say no to these consults. Like I couldn't email them and be like, hey, I screwed up and I really don't have time to meet with you. Like I just couldn't even do that, And so I pushed myself through all of those things and got clients that just weren't a good fit. And it was incredibly stressful. Every time I go to a call, it would just not line up with how I wanted to coach and how they were expecting to be coached. Even though I had a consult with them, somehow it just didn't translate. So just like even being able to say no to clients that I knew on the consult weren't good fits, or we wouldn't really like have a successful, program. I just said, if they said yes and they paid me, I took them. Right. And it was one of those things where I learned that that's probably not the best way to manage the situation because I burnt out because I took some clients that weren't really conducive to how I coached. So I think those are the main things that I realized. And also I didn't really have the capacity to I was working one-on-one. So I only could take a certain number of clients. And so I took too many. And then I couldn't take consults because I had too many clients, or I took consults and then I couldn't schedule my clients because I had no time. So it's like all these little logistics that you don't really think about at all when it comes to just like, sounds like a great thing. I have all these people coming for me and wanting things, but there's a lot of logistics that I just didn't have in place.
Yeah. And it sounds like you were so caught up in keeping up and all of that stuff that was happening and like just getting through every day that it felt like you were doing okay. It felt like you were managing things all right. But one of the things that you mentioned was like a lot of the practices that you have for regulating your nervous system. You're like, oh, I don't need to do these. I got this covered. So
exactly.
Do you do things differently now? Like, do you do some of those practices even when you feel like you're quote unquote fine?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. And actually every time I have any sort of, I want to say negative feeling, like anything that comes up and I feel myself resisting the feeling, let's say I'm disappointed that somebody said no. And typically sometimes in my mind, I'll say like, I shouldn't feel disappointed. It's fine. Like I'll find another I stop myself because that is the number one reason that me personally am dysregulated is when I resist my feelings. Some people avoid, some people react, right? There's all these different ways that you can deal with your feelings. For me, it's resist. And so I catch myself now when I resist my feelings, and I actually give myself validation, which has been huge. So I literally say to myself, of course you're disappointed. It makes so much sense. And I just talk to myself in my mind as soon as I feel that resistance. And then I also do a lot of like tapping and more physical processing of emotions. And 100%, this is another mistake I made. I did not have the support I needed during that time, where I didn't have a one-on-one coach to support me through some of the regulation that I needed to have. And that was a huge mistake. And now I do. So I keep those supports in place. I actually have I have a coach and a therapist, just to make sure that I don't just go into that mode again and feel like I'm fine and or think I'm fine and I'm not, and that's been really, really good, because I can go through with my coach, I can go through with her some of these practices, and we can process some things that are big, and she's able to provide that validation for me and help me feel like what I'm feeling is, again, totally understandable and makes sense. And to have someone in relationship do that for you is like incredibly healing. Mm-hmm. So, it's not something you want to like overlook if you're an entrepreneur. It's like the support system has to be there. Like I have a business coach, a regular coach, and a therapist, so it's like, I get that it costs money, but it's really critical for you to sustain the business that you want to have and feel good while doing it. Right. I mean, the whole reason we have businesses is because we love it. And it's fun for us in a way. We want to sustain that. We want to make sure that keeps going. And so those are some things that I do now. And also, of course, lots of breaks, lots of walking, lots of, just paying attention to how my stress is lowered. My stress is lowered a lot by exercise. My stress is lowered a lot by like deep breathing. So I just kind of do the things that work for me. And I think everybody has to find their thing. Some people love like meditation, stuff like that, more than anything else. But I think it's also just, again, that stopping and noticing and really like tuning in when it's so easy to just externally just force things and tune out, right? If I can just get this done and get this done and get that done, it's almost like an avoidance tactic sometimes. I do it too, right? I just need to put this out, do this, send this email, and then it'll be okay, right? Everything will work out. Someone will contact me, but it's like, no, really, the universe is not going to send you anybody if you're all like dysregulated and screwed, overwhelmed. I mean, you don't have the capacity for it. And I've seen that like, time and time again, where I'm like, what's happening? Why is no one, signing up for anything? And then I'm like, oh, it's because I couldn't handle it right now. Like I couldn't handle more than I already had on my plate. Yeah. So it can be really helpful to just kind of recognize if that's happening too. Because then you're like, oh, nothing's wrong. I just am human and have human emotions, and that's that.
Right. I always have really big plans for my self-care and like what my daily schedule is going to look like when I'm all caught up. Like as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking like, have you ever actually been all caught up? Like, is that a thing?
No, not as an entrepreneur.
Think it's a thing. But over and over, I tell myself, like, we'll build in exercise. We'll build in walking the dog in the middle of the day. We'll build in whatever when I'm caught up.
And I bet that's a very common feeling, I'm sure. But yeah, it's true. When you're an entrepreneur, you decide when you're caught up. You're the boss. Like nobody's telling you, now you're done. Now you can go take a break. You actually get to decide that. And so there has been times for me where I'm like, okay, I could either post a reel or I could go for a walk right now. And I just tap in. And half the time my brain is like, you got to post a reel, dude, because this is the important thing. And then my body's like, I can't. Like, you can't. Just don't. And it's so loud now that I'm like, okay, I'm walking away. I'm going to take a walk. And then at some point it'll happen. Like, I just have to trust that I can tune in and really know that now is the time for me to like be able to do that. And to be honest, usually your content's way better if you're in that place anyway. So, and you're, again, that attractiveness that you have to people is going to go up when you're feeling regulated and filled up to an extent. And, like you can give and give and you're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just that awareness, like you said, of just stopping and being aware of like, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What's going on in my body? That's something that most of us don't do. And I think that allows the stories that are going in our mind to like continue on unchecked. Like, they're usually not true, but they feel really true, especially when they've been told like 10 million times. Like I'm thinking about last night, this is really dorky, so nobody make fun of me, but I got a new adult coloring book that is Taylor Swift themed cats. And those are like two of my favorite things in one coloring book.
I love it.
And it arrived yesterday. And I also got these new gel pens. I don't color. This is not my thing, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to color now that Taylor Swift cat coloring book exists. And so last night I'm like, I can't. I really wanted to do my coloring book because I just got it, but I was like, no, I can't. I got so much to do. I have way too much to do. Like over and over again. That's always my story. I have way too much to do. And it's even harder when you work in your home, right? Because then it's not like, well, I'm going to drive back to the office and do my work, which I probably wouldn't. But if it's like, I'm going to walk 5 steps. And so I came back in here and I looked at my calendar and I looked at my to-do list and I was like, do you really have too much to do that you could not take tonight off and color in your Taylor Swift coloring book? And I'm like, no, I'm actually like really pretty caught up on a lot of things. But it's like just taking that time to stop and be like, is this story even true?
Well, I mean, you're not alone in that. And there's many reasons why, but one of the main reasons is because that's how we were conditioned in this culture, right? This patriarchal hustling, productivity equals worth. Whole other episode, but productivity equals worth is a really, really big one. Or productivity equals like dopamine or success, whatever. But we're like productivity machines. So like if you're not stopping and checking in with your body, it is not your fault. We are not trained to do that in this culture, right? There was no, like when you were a kid, nobody was like, hey, bud, how are you feeling? Do you want to do that? Is that really a good thing? Like, do you want to sit and just relax instead? Nobody's doing that for you, right? So like, how does it feel in your body? Like, I mean, that's why I coach parents, because I want that to be the next, situation for our kids. But like, it is something that we are unconsciously conditioned to, right? Yeah. And so to really have the habit of, well, you call it self-care, which, definitely qualifies. But for me, it's like taking care of my nervous system is critical. Like it's literally like life or death in my mind, and, but it is still really easy even for me who knows all these things about myself to just ignore my body, right? Because we're conditioned unconsciously not to pay attention to it. And, it's so funny because when I deal with clients, sometimes they don't understand, they don't have that consciousness that they have feelings in their body at all. It's all head based, right? And that's also something that a lot of us were trained to feel or go to, is like, oh, I feel it in my head. It's like, no, actually emotions are felt in the body, right? That's where they are, but it's not something that we're consciously aware of. Like most people aren't consciously aware of it. So how are you supposed to tune in if you don't even know that your emotions are in your body or what they feel like, or, it can feel like a very different way of being, and to just keep going and working and just doing what you have to do. That feels a lot more comfortable a lot of times, Yeah.
And probably even more complex when you are a highly sensitive person. And so you've probably been told many times in your life that you're too much, you're too sensitive, you're being dramatic, you're getting worked up over nothing, right? Like all these messages that you get that how you feel and what you think and whatever's going on in your body is wrong. And so I would think a lot of people have learned to just kind of override that. And so there is a element of like getting back into like, it's okay that this is how I feel. It's okay to acknowledge that. It's not too much. It's just who I am. And I have to be honest about it if I'm going to get through this.
Right. Yes. And I do think that a lot of times when we do start paying attention to our bodies, it can be very hard, like very uncomfortable. Like I said, it can be super uncomfortable because there's all this rhetoric going on in our mind that something's wrong because we're not able to push through. We're not able to hustle. We're not, we're not able to do the 9 to 5. Like we're not doing enough or being productive, or if you get busy and you can't handle it, right? That's always what it felt like for me. Like I can't handle X, Y, or Z. And so then I'm like, well, I can handle it. Nothing's wrong with me. Like I'm smart. I can figure this out. I can handle it. But in reality, it's not about that. Like most of us actually weren't built to handle many of the things, like physically and viscerally and nervous system wise, built to handle this culture. It's gone above and beyond our capabilities and our brain capabilities. Like, I mean, I could go down another rabbit hole about dopamine and all the pleasure filled stuff that we have to deal with too. But like, that's also something that we're not evolved to handle. So I think that we have to recognize that if this is something you struggle with, tuning into your body, not listening to that hustle culture, like not listening to productivity equals work, it's definitely because we just haven't caught up to where we are in the world in progress wise, so this is not something that you have failed at. Like it's definitely something that is difficult in this culture to pay attention to and know about, right? And value, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is such good stuff. I feel like I could keep going. We have like nine other podcast episodes ready in this one.
Hey, I'm up for it.
So you mentioned like giving yourself that space to just like be present and check in with yourself and like, where are we at? How are we feeling? Let's be honest about this. You also mentioned like tapping, deep breathing, meditation, exercise. Is there anything else that you recommend that if someone's listening to this and they're like, I think I might be highly sensitive, that you have found that is like maybe something simple they could start to implement today to try to kind of build up some of that resilience?
Yes. So I was trained in conversational hypnosis. I have a certification in conversational hypnosis. And a lot of the tools that I learned for that are amazing. They're basically nervous system regulation tools, is basically what they are. And one of the things that is the most simple thing that I really do a lot, especially when I can't fall asleep or I'm really stressed, is I just drop the back of my tongue off the roof of my mouth and try to sort of relax my jaw. And you can do it anywhere. Nobody knows you're doing it. And it basically tells your brain that you're in rest and digest. You're in the parasympathetic nervous system. So it calms you completely down. Is it the parasympathetic? Yeah. So that you actually are able to have that anxiety lower or that stress lower. And a lot of times that's what you need to fall asleep, or that's what you need to post that thing, or, so it's basically tricking your brain sort of, but in reality, telling your brain you're safe. Yeah. So that's one of my favorite tools to use, like, cause it's so easy to do without anybody knowing about it. And so sometimes I'll notice if I'm super anxious, like this morning I went to the doctor and I was really anxious and I was like, oh, my tongue is like, rock solid up against that. You can tell where you're at in that regard based on that tongue. And so as soon as you release it, which sometimes can be difficult, it just, does the opposite. So that's one of my favorite tools. And then the deep breathing method that I use, you can also do on your own anywhere. It's in for 4 and then exhale for 8, because the long exhale engages your vagus nerve, which is what your nervous system is built on. So you're going to long exhale. And again, in through the nose, out through the mouth. But that one is super, super easy to do anywhere. So if all you're doing is catching yourself in resistance, avoidance, some sort of feeling, doing a deep breathing or doing a drop the tongue, it's going to be a huge difference. Like just even those small little shifts, even if it's like once a week, you remember to do it, So, and that's one of the things that I like about these tools is like, there's no prescription on how often or when. It's just getting them involved, just getting them sort of in your habit, in your habits throughout the day to just kind of remember some of it. And you can't really fail at it. Like if you're doing it at all, you're succeeding. So it's like, it's nice. It's nice. So you don't have to be hard on yourself about it. It's not like that.
Yeah. So that's really good. I would guess 90% of the people listening did exactly what I just did when you said that, and was like, oh my gosh, I did not realize I was like clenching my jaw. And then when you were talking about the deep breathing and I was breathing and I was like, I don't think I've breathed like this all day.
I know. It's really so easy to forget that stuff. It really is. And that makes a big difference when you remember. It's crazy.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to connect with you further, if they want to learn more about what you do with parents, if they want to learn more about how they could help support maybe their highly sensitive child or anything about you. Maybe they just want to see the reel that went viral. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, typically Instagram, I would recommend. It's Adrienne Bishop Coaching as my handle. And the reel I went viral is pretty deep buried in there, but you'll find it if you look. And then I also have a Facebook group, Calm Confident Parenting. So those are probably the best ways. And then if you're anywhere on either of those things, you should be able to find my email and stuff like that if you want to contact me further.
Awesome. I will put the links for both of those things in the show notes so everyone can follow you. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was super, super good.
Thank you, Melissa. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Your Relationship With podcast. I'm going to drop all of Adrienne's links in the show notes so that you can connect with her in the way that works best for you. I'm also going to drop that link I mentioned in the intro for you to schedule a free 20-minute session with her if you feel like what she's talking about applies to you and you want to work on unblocking one issue in your business. If you want to take your business to the next level and you want to do it through genuine connections and authentic relationships, definitely click the link in the show notes to find out more about the Powerful Women Rising community. You can hang out more with me and with a whole bunch of other incredible female entrepreneurs who are just as invested in your business growth as they are in their own. It's such a positive, fun, sharing community. I just can't stress it enough. So definitely check that out and make sure to follow Powerful Women Rising on Instagram so that you don't miss any of my hilarity or any of my actual helpful content. Bye.